welcome to this Budget 2021 special on India Today. I'm Chaiti Narula. As the government is getting ready to unveil a closely watched budget on Monday, it's going to be a big bang one as the market expects. We take you through the expectations and the questions that are surrounding the budget at this point of time. But before that, ahead of the budget session of the Parliament, Prime Minister Modi in a statement claimed that FY22 budget needs to be seen as a part of a series of mini budgets tabled throughout 2020. Listen in to what the Prime Minister said.
इस दशक का आज ये पहला सत्र प्रारंभ हो रहा है। भारत के उज्जवल भविष्य के लिए ये दशक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है और इसलिए प्रारंभ से ही आजादी के दीवानों ने जो सपने देखे थे, उन सपनों को, उन संकल्पों को तेज गति से सिद्ध करने का ये स्वर्णिम अवसर अब देश के पास आया है।
This year, the budget is even more crucial as it is coming during the pandemic era and is going to be addressing the economic blow that the country suffered on the back of the COVID crisis. And the economy, as you all know, went into a recession. Not even a slowdown, but an absolute recession. Let's now take a look at what happened in 2020 and why some people are terming it the worst year for the Indian economy.
Millions of jobs lost, MSMEs hit, government coffers ran empty. The GDP growth slumped minus 23.9%. 2020 was the worst year for India's economy since the country started calculating these figures.
0.24% of GDP growth is the worst that India has ever reported since we began recording quarterly GDP growth in 1996. So this makes the April-June quarter of 2020 the worst in 24 years. Now considering that July-September quarter has been as bad if not worse than the April-June quarter, this clearly indicates that we are well and truly into recession.
The pandemic had brought the entire world's economic activity to a halt. But India was one of the worst hit, as the country went for one of the most stringent lockdowns anywhere in the world.
Lockdowns design has affected the COVID, and this is affecting international mood. Investment into India is not coming out. Unemployment in India in the months of April and May shot to over 23%, a rare rise in unemployment. So you froze the economy totally and allowed a whole lot of people to be scattered all over. So the germs were spreading and the economy was frozen.
The halt also triggered the biggest ever migration since India's independence.
कभी तो कुछ मिल जाए खाने को, कभी कुछ नहीं मिले। 3 महीने ऐसे काट दिए हैं, लॉकडाउन लगा रहा। हमारे क्या कहते तबियत बिगड़ रही तो हमने की चलो इधर से अपने भाग चले इधर से।
हम लोग कढ़ाई का काम करते हैं सर, तो वो गांव चले गए। हम लोगों को कहीं से कोई पैसे देने वाला नहीं है, कोई खाना देने वाला नहीं है। जो रोड पे लगता है वो खाना हम लोग को मिलता है।
While those employed in the informal sector took to roads for survival, the salaried class too couldn't save itself from the storm. CMIE data showed 17.7 million salaried jobs were lost in April 2020, and another 0.1 million jobs were lost in the month of May, while 3.9 million jobs were gained in June. An additional 5 million jobs were lost in July.
We didn't anticipate a pandemic, so the stress was far more in some areas than in some other areas.
People not just had to shift to work from home, some had to switch their entire careers and be Atmanirbhar in order to survive.
सर्वाइवल के लिए कॉस्ट कटिंग पे जैसे कंपनियां आ गई, उनका काम नहीं चल रहा था और क्लोजेज, ऑफिस क्लोजेज हुए, मैन पावर की छटनी स्टार्ट हो गया, तो उस लिस्ट में हमारा भी था।
कुछ न कुछ तो करना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि परिवार और जो हमारे एम्प्लॉय है उन लोगों की जवाबदारी हमारे ऊपर थी। इसलिए तुरंत डिसीजन लेके हमने वेजिटेबल और फ्रूट्स, जो कोविड सिचुएशन में जो लोग बाहर नहीं निकलते और उनको इजीली हम ये अप्लाई कर सके, इसीलिए हमने ये डिसीजन लिया।
The government announced multiple schemes and packages to infuse liquidity in the economy.
कोरोना संकट से जुड़ी जो आर्थिक घोषणाएं की थी, जो रिजर्व बैंक के फैसले थे और आज जिस आर्थिक पैकेज का ऐलान हो रहा है, उसे जोड़ दें तो ये करीब करीब 20 लाख करोड़ रुपए का है।
The overall package announced was of 20 lakh crore rupees, worth 10% of India's GDP. But it also included all government actions, including announcements made by the country's central bank. But in December 2020, to information petition revealed that less than 10% of the package had actually been dispersed, chiefly in the form of emergency credit.
Over 5 years, the trend is a downward trend, and we need very serious professional input to reverse this, and it is entirely possible to reverse this. We need determination and skill.
Now, as the country reels from the after effects of an economic standstill, the biggest challenge ahead is to bring the financial system back on its feet. And the Finance Minister says she is ready with a budget like never before to tackle the challenge that 2021 brings.
I am conscious that the forthcoming budget will have a vibrancy which is so required for the economy's revival.
And joining us to discuss what the expectations from the budget are, Mr. Subrakant Panda, Vice President of FICCI. Welcome to the show. What a pleasure to have you with us. And Dr. Jayajit Bhattacharya, as always, who is the President for Center for Digital Economy and Policy Research and a renowned economist. Welcome to the show. Let's start off with Dr. Bhattacharya. Dr. Bhattacharya, one cannot deny this is surely going to be one of the most important budget sessions after what we saw, the global recession that was sparked off by Lehman collapse. The spends are going to be important to boost consumption. But how, in your opinion, do you see this pan out, given that the unexpected cost of the pandemic is surely going to be resulting in the deficit overshooting the targeted 3.5% of the GDP by a huge margin? There are estimates, of course, predicting that it could be end up as high as 7% of the GDP. In your opinion, as an economist, what should the government's priorities be in this budget? Where is it going to be finding the resources to fund its spending as well?
Yeah, I would like to make two opening observations that this downturn that is happening is significantly different in its quality from the downturn that happened because of the Lehman Brothers collapse. Because in this case, the fundamental institutions have not been impacted. The economic structure has not been impacted.
Right.
So we should be able to bounce back quickly because it's more like a blip in our economic growth. In terms of the fiscal deficit, again, it's not a sacrosanct sacred cow that we should not be breaching the fiscal deficit. It is important in times like this that we should be flexible, and we need to breach that fiscal deficit to the extent that is needed. And I think, as rightly pointed out by the chief economic advisor, that at some point in time we need to rein ourselves back, but this is not the time to do that. Just like we have allowed forbearance to happen from a lending perspective, the same thing should be allowed from a fiscal deficit perspective, and rightly the government is expected to take that route. It could hit as high as 8 to 9% of the total GDP in that sense. And I think at this time, that's possibly the right thing to do. Will that lead to an immediate growth of the economy back? Well, it seems from all the data that is coming in that we are already on a V-shaped recovery, as long as things are as expected. And what I mean by that we don't have a second wave of a pandemic which is resilient to the vaccine and so on and so forth. So everything, if it is as expected, then we should continue on the V growth that has been widely talked about. So I think we're in the right direction in that sense. There isn't much more to be done at this stage, and I think we need to go beyond the 3.5% fiscal deficit and not treat it as a sacred cow, and make sure that whatever needs to be pumped in at this point in time, we should do that. Fortunately, as I mentioned, the larger structure of the economy is intact and the demand is there in the economy. Fortunately, the agricultural sector performed very well, and therefore we should be back on a robust growth path, as has been predicted by both IMF and the economy.
Yes, absolutely. And, I'm going to bring in Mr. Panda on this one. Mr. Panda, are you in agreement with Dr. Bhattacharya on what he just said? And in fact, he mentioned about the economic survey. That is expecting the economy to grow by 11% in real terms, of course, adjusted for inflation by FY22 as well. It is very close to the growth that has been projected by the IMF of 11%. And on the back of all of this, can we expect some sort of an expansionary budget with higher deficit targets, like Jayjeet mentioned, to the tune of about 8 to 9% for the next fiscal?
Well, I'm in complete agreement with Dr. Bhattacharya that this is not the time to be timid. This is not the time to be, worried about fiscal deficits and the like. It was a once-in-a-century pandemic, and I think, as the Finance Minister has said, that it will be probably a once-in-a-century type of a budget, where we have to keep aside any concerns about reaching the fiscal deficit target of 3.5%. I would not like to, go into whether it will be 7 or 8 or 9%. That is the Finance Minister's prerogative. But speaking from an industry perspective, I certainly think that now is the time to focus on growth, on measures which will bring about both investment as well as consumption. And speaking about the economic survey, I mean, it's brought out very, very nicely, very lucidly what we knew all along, that certainly there was a significant impact to the economy arising out of COVID. But I believe that, a lot had been made out of a lot of hue and cry about the unprecedented 23.7% contraction in Q1. But what nobody makes out is, when you look at the fact that the GDP contraction for the year is going to be about 7.7%. But out of that, the H2 component is a meager 0.1%. So the economy is clearly on a sharp rebound. And there are, N number of indicators, the high frequency indicators like electricity consumptions, e-way bills, etc. And not to mention, of course, the GST collections, which have been more than 1 lakh crores for 3 consecutive months, the highest ever in December 2020, and likely to be higher still in January 21. So from that point of view, I think the government has done well to have a measured response to the pandemic to begin with, and has saved the firepower to come out swinging when it is needed most.
So, Dr. Bhattacharya, since Mr. Panda was also talking about these measures, in your opinion, what are the specific measures would you like to see the government announce to shore up this consumption demand? Would you like to see the taxes lowered and, like Mr. Panda mentioned, reduction in GST rates, create an equivalent of urban equivalent of Manrega, or any other priorities that come to your mind at the moment?
I think all of this, but most importantly, I think the focus should be back on infrastructure.
Okay.
We were on a trajectory of creating large-scale infrastructure, and I think there was a bit of a pause on that. It's important why we should focus on infrastructure for 2 reasons. One, because we need the infrastructure. But second, more importantly, that's also a very good mechanism of pumping money back into the economy. And that's going to lead to the increase in wealth, an increase in income, and so on and so forth. Now, in terms of lowering taxes, that's something that we have always been asking for. The GST rates are one of the highest in the world. And the multiple rates, including the multitude of regulations and the compliances that have suddenly ballooned up. I think all of those needs to be rolled back. It's still very difficult to do business, especially for the small industries. And I think on an urgent basis, if we can reduce the number of compliances, especially for the small industry, and along with it, reduce taxes is an obvious one. It would help in the growth happening, but my number one priority will still be in terms of infrastructure being rolled out and as a very quick mechanism of pumping money back into the economy in a very constructive manner, which leads to assets getting created.
All right, on that note, we're stepping into a very short commercial break here on India Today. Our guests continue to be with us. See you on the other side with their analysis and expectations for the upcoming budget. Welcome back. You're watching In-Depth Budget Special. On Friday in the Parliament, the Finance Minister tabled the annual economic survey. Let's now take a look at the highlights of the document. Remember, the year gone by was unprecedented as the Indian economy took a major hit due to the pandemic.
Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman tabled the Economic Survey 2020-21 in Parliament on Friday. The Economic Survey 2020-21 predicted that India's real GDP growth for the fiscal year 2021-22 will expand 11%. This after the Economic Survey estimated that there had been a 7.7% contraction in 2020-21 driven by the pandemic.
In this year of adversity, when a once-in-a-century pandemic has hit us, India has really outweighed on the opportunities that this pandemic provides compared to the risks. That is also being shown in the cover.
The survey said that the COVID-19 pandemic caused a once-in-a-century global crisis in 2020. The survey notes that a unique recession has taken place which impacted 90% of countries across the world to experience a contraction in GDP per capita. But for India, the survey predicts a V-shaped recovery, as the one seen in the 7.5% decline in Q2 and the recovery across all key economic indicators.
This year's economic survey is dedicated to all the COVID warriors who have really helped in upholding India. If you see the cover of the economic survey, we have the COVID warriors joining hands to uphold India. The cover also captures the V-shaped recovery that has happened in the economy.
Noting that the COVID-induced crisis impacted both supply and demand, the survey stressed that India's 30 lakh crore rupees stimulus package would help to expand supply significantly in the medium to long term. The survey goes on to say that reforms and easing of regulations will lead to further boost to the economy. The economic survey projections are in line with the IMF estimates of real GDP growth of 11.5% in 2021-22 for India and 6.8% in 2022-23.
And Mr. Panda and Jayjeet are still with us. Starting off with you, Mr. Panda, every year we see that the government is unable to earn as much money as it expects to on the revenue side for the government. Even in 2020, we saw that. In this particular year, where do you see and how do you see and you expect the Finance Minister to really look at on the revenue part of the budget?
Well, first of all, as I said, fortunately, revenue collection in terms of GST receipts have been on an upswing, and I hope that trend will continue. But that apart, I think the Finance Minister has to look at strategic divestments especially in non-core areas to raise resources. That apart, I think there is also a need to perhaps look at issuing long-term bonds which can help India lock in the historically low interest rates. So that's where the resources
But Mr. Panda, as far as the taxes are concerned, yes, that's just one part of the revenue making process. And if I could just walk you through some number, there was a targeted 2.1 lakh crore by 20th Jan 2021. The government was able to earn only 15,220 crores through this route as far as divestment is concerned. That is about 7.2% of the targeted amount. So they're missing targets year after year.
Well, this is not a fair way to look at it, because obviously the last year has been absolutely unprecedented, and I don't think there was any way to be able to meet those disinvestment targets, and especially when one of the larger ticket items, which is the LIC disinvestment, has been held up for certain procedural issues, from what I understand. But going ahead, I'm sure you'd agree that this is the right time with markets being at all-time highs or close to all-time highs. this is the time to actually set an aggressive target and follow through with it, which I'm convinced with the right focus, it is possible to deliver on that front.
Right. Dr. Bhattacharya, the RBI in its financial stability report, I don't know if you've read it, expressed concerns about high potential NPAs for the banking sector that perhaps may well rise above 14%. What is your view on the banking sector following the financial stability report?
I think unfortunately it's been almost a decade that we continue to have the dual balance sheet stressed issue, where both the bank's balance sheet and the company balance sheets have been stretched. And this started off with the PPP projects and the infrastructure projects towards the end of last decade. It is a matter of concern, and although steps have been taken, such as the forbearance and restructuring of the debt, but we do clearly see that there will be a lot of defaults happening. In fact, one of the points that we did not talk about in terms of revenues is actually direct taxation.
Sure.
I believe the direct taxation will take a hit this time because the profitability of the corporates have actually lowered. In fact, clearly there will be a debt, restructuring that will be needed because the profitability has been hit for many of these corporations. It also means that there will be a taxation hit from the government perspective. So clearly, it is a matter of deep concern, and also the fact that if any of these companies go belly up and they shut down, that will be a productive asset going, shutting down, and you can't revive something which is dead. And I think those are matters of concern, and all steps should be taken to actually support, these organizations which might be having a debt issue. In fact, this was the liquidity issue and the pressures on the company has been around from 2018 onwards. So it's not just this year's development in that sense. But the COVID has been kind of the last bunch of straws in the camel's back.
Absolutely.
For those companies and entities which were not performing that well. And I think we need to take the RBI report very, very seriously.
Right. And lastly, we've got less than a minute left on the show. Mr. Panda, would you like to see a rise in allocation coming in for the healthcare sector, given the pandemic has exposed the weakness in the sector? And also not to forget that the consensus largely is infrastructure and agriculture should be the top priorities of the government this year.
Well, undoubtedly, infrastructure, as has been mentioned, agriculture, of course, needs to be supported. It's one of the sectors which has done well in the year gone by, and obviously needs to be supported going ahead. But healthcare is also a critical area which needs more investment. And I think what better than a pandemic to make us realize that this is something that we need to focus on more than ever before. And I believe the healthcare spend, which is currently in the range of about 1 to 1.2%, there is a call to increase that to 2.5 or even as high as 3%. And that is, I think, very necessary. It will also help in by way of bringing down the out-of-pocket expenses, which are, I believe, currently at about 65%. That will go down substantially if there is more investment in the healthcare sector. And I think that is something that definitely needs to be looked at seriously and adequate resources allocated.
Jayjeet, one last word before we wrap up.
No, I totally agree. I think infrastructure and agriculture are clearly the important areas to focus on. But I think healthcare, the government has kind of started doing the right things by putting in the support infrastructure, the Ayushman Bharat program. And as Mr. Panda rightly pointed out, that focus should continue to be there and should not get defocused. And in addition, I think we need to follow through in the implementation of the new education policy. That's critical to bring our human resource in alignment with the growth that we should expect in this decade. We need to have the right human infrastructure in place, and that's where I think a significant focus on education and human resource development is very much needed.
Well, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for taking time out, Dr. Bhattacharya and Mr. Panda as well. Those were some very valuable inputs that you gave us today. And we're just hoping that on Monday, when the budget comes out, everyone is happy. Although you can't keep everyone happy, as every year there will be some who won't be very happy with it. But it is a big bang budget. Lots of hopes riding on this particular budget presented by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. And the big focus perhaps is going to be agriculture, infrastructure and healthcare. Let's wait and watch to see what happens on Monday.
Hi everyone, Preeti Chaudhary here. Hope you like this video. For latest news and analysis, Like and subscribe to the India Today YouTube channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated. Thank you for watching.